For tonight's homework, we're going to practice some SBAC release questions. Attempt each problem yourself first and then correct it with this option. Enter the value of 3/4 plus 7/12 minus -4. Well, let's think about how we could combine those fractions together first. I know when I add fractions, I need to have a common denominator. So one common denominator I could choose would be 12, because I know I can make 3/4 into 12ths relatively easily. So 4 times 3 would give me 12, 3 times 3 would give me 9. So now I've got 9/12 plus 7/12, and then I'll deal with that minus -4 a little bit later. So this now gives me 16/12. And I can simplify that. I could divide the top and the bottom by 2, for example, which would give me 8/6. I could keep dividing by 2, that would give me 4/3, and that's the same as 1 1/3. So now I have 1 1/3 minus -4. Do you remember how you subtract a negative? Well, you can actually turn it into an addition problem by adding a positive. So I'm actually going to do 1 1/3 plus +4, which would give me 5 1/3 as the final answer. Take a moment and note if you were able to get that correct, or if you still needed some help with that. Mark buys a wooden board that is 7 1/2 feet long. The cost of the wooden board is 50 cents per foot, including tax. Enter the total cost in dollars of the wooden board. This is an example of a proportional reasoning problem. So if the wood is 50 cents per foot, I can start to set up this ratio here. And I know I have 7 1/2, I'm going to write it with a decimal, feet. So how could we scale this up? Well, 1 times 7 1/2 would be 7 1/2. 50 cents times 7 1/2. Well, there's lots of ways to think about this. One way might be to think 7 1/2 times $1 would be $7.50. But this isn't times $1, this is times 50 cents. So again, lots of different ways you could do this. One way would be to multiply with decimals here. So I have 5 times 5 would be 25, 5 times 7 would be 35, plus 2 would be 37, and I have 2 decimal places, so I'm going to need to have 2 decimal places in my answer. So I'm estimating it's going to be $3.75 to purchase that board, and that would make a true statement over here as well with my proportion. Take a moment and note if you were able to get that one correct. Enter the value of p, so the expression 5/6 minus 1/3 n is equivalent to p times the quantity of 5 minus 2n. This is a problem you might recognize from extra credit here recently, except it wasn't quite entered in correctly, and so it was kind of difficult to solve. So let's take a look at what this is saying. 5/6 minus 1/3 n equals p times 5 minus 2n. And we want to find what does p equal. So if we take a look at this for a second, I want to think about how could I find some value of p so that when I distribute that p to each term here, I would get 5/6 minus 1/3 n. So thinking about it for just a second, what would I need to multiply 5 by to make 5/6? Well, you might be thinking I would need to multiply by 1/6. So let's see if that would work. 1/6 times 5 minus 2n. If I distributed the 1/6 to each term, I would get 5/6, because 5 times 1/6 is 5/6, minus, and this 1/6 times 2 would become 2/6 n. And what could I simplify 2/6 to? Well, that would be the same as 5/6 minus 1/3 n. And you might be noticing that matches exactly with what I wanted to make. So my p-value here needs to be 1/6. This is a tricky problem, and again, it's trying to get you to think about the distributive property. Take a moment and note if you got it correct. Enter the value of the expression, 2 3/10 times the quantity of 4 plus 12. This problem is thinking about order of operations. Do we multiply or do parentheses first? Hopefully you're thinking about parentheses. So this problem can be rewritten as 2 3/10 times 16. So now I'm going to go ahead and multiply those guys together. This is a good chance to practice some multiplying without a calculator. So 3 times 6, we have 18. 3 times 1 plus another 1 would give me 4. 2 times 6 would give me 12. 2 times 1 plus 1 would give me 3. To add these together, 8, 6, 3. I have one decimal place up here, so I'll have 1 in my answer. So I have a final answer of 36 8/10.
Redmond and Kissinger, dial 6903.
And that's exactly what happens all the time during Zaption videos. So take a moment and note if you had that correct. Which number line shows the solution to the inequality negative 3x minus 5 is less than negative 2? Do you remember how to solve inequalities? All right, let's take a look. Negative 3x minus 5 is less than negative 2. So remember how we solve these kind of like an equation, right? So I'm going to start by adding 5 to each side because I'm trying to get x by itself. So I now have negative 3x is less than positive 3. But now I have to get x by itself, so I need to divide by negative 3. Do you remember what happens when I divide by a negative with an inequality? I have to flip the inequality. So now I'm going to have x is greater than, and this becomes 3 divided by negative 3 is negative 1. So let's see which one has the correct inequality. Now you might be thinking, does it need to be an open circle or a closed circle? If x is greater than negative 1, that needs to be an open circle. It does not include the value of negative 1. And it's greater than, so it should be an arrow that's going to the right. Notice how it matches with the inequality direction. So let's take a look and see which one has a value of negative 1 with an open circle with the arrow going to the right. And I'm looking right here and I see my very first one, A, has negative 1, open circle, and the values going to the right. Take a moment and notice if you had that correct. The spinner has 8 equal-sized sections, each labeled 1, 2, 3, or 4. The arrow on the spinner is spun. What is the probability of the arrow stopping on a section labeled with a 2? I'm noticing that there's 3 sections with a label of 2 out of 8 sections total. So 3 out of 8 sections have a 2. So I'm going to say probability of 2 is 3/8. That would go with answer C. Take a moment and note if you got that correct. Which expression is equivalent to negative 8 times the quantity of 10x minus 3? This is another distributive property problem. So negative 8 times the quantity of 10x minus 3. We need to distribute the negative 8 to all of the terms involved. So negative 8 times 10x would be negative 80x. Then I have this minus sign here, so I'm going to put a minus. And negative 8 times 3 is negative 24. I'm going to also notice here, though, that negative 80x minus a negative is going to turn into adding a positive. So I can also say this is negative 80x plus 24. And that would go with answer A. Take a moment and note if you had that correct.